All right, now I'm gonna get a notification when I'm recording. All right, we're recording. All right, welcome, Daniel. Thank you for being on the podcast, episode 3 of One to Come Up, where we go over our guest's entire life, see who they are personally, professionally, and then we see why they are the way they are. Um, so, Daniel, I have some interesting stories here from your childhood that I found out a little bit. Um, so that's where I go. I go all the way back to your childhood, if you don't mind. And so when you were 8, you said you started reading business biographies, and when you were 12, you wrote some mail to Bill Gates, and he got back to you, and he had an autograph, and he said one day you were going to be very successful. And look at you now. So how did he know all the way back when you were 8 and 12 years old? How did he know you wanted to do something like this?
Well, you've done your research, Danny.
Yeah.
That is true. Like from my earliest memories, I was obsessed with business. And I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. So my great grandparents had started a furniture store in Niagara Falls, Canada, called Saks Furniture. So kind of grew up exposed to the furniture store, and my other grandparents also were in business. So I really always grew up learning and being interested by different businesses, what works, what doesn't. I would, go into a random store and try to ask, for the owner and learn about how they run their business and lessons that they've learned. And normally, a kid might obsess over a celebrity or an athlete. But for me, it was like the business figures. And at the time, Bill Gates had started Microsoft and was one of the, fastest and most successful business leaders in history. So I thought, wow, I want to get to know this guy. And I sent, back then you had to send physical mail. And I
I'm
sent
trying to
like a
think about
message.
that.
Yeah, I sent a message to him and he sent back like an autographed picture with a note. And it was kind of nice. He said, I can't respond, I can't take a call with everyone, but here's an autograph, and I know that you're going to be successful. Or he said something like that. So that was really motivating. But what's interesting is that cold outreach has always been a great way for me to be able to grow my network and be able to add value to people. And I appreciated that you had reached out,
Yeah.
cold, right, to invite me on the podcast. And I thought your message hit and was definitely something that I wanted to reciprocate.
Well, thank you. I really do appreciate it, and it truly is amazing at the power of cold outreach that it actually does work. I was amazed when I first started it that people even got back to me. All right, so then the next thing I found was when you were how old were you? 20 years old at McGill College, and you were working as a sales rep at Royal Bank of Canada, right? And there you started a website before websites were a big thing and before the cloud was a big thing. And you know that really helped drive sales, drive revenue there. But I've noticed that's really a theme of yours to be kind of avant-garde, to be ahead of the time. So and most people struggle with that. So what's allowed you to be so forward thinking? Can you handle risk? Can you handle the pressure? Or what's up with that?
I'm a big fan about like living in the future. So I always think about what could exist in the world today that doesn't, and how do you address that gap. And that's one of the things that motivates me most. I'm sure we'll get into this later, but I just recently started my second company, and after
Yeah.
my first, I could have retired and done nothing. I could have just enjoyed the rest of my life. But I was motivated to start something again because I really saw the opportunity to help businesses. So that's always been a huge motivator for me. Going back to the experience when I was in my 20s, or even, yeah, I think I was 20 years old. I did an internship at the Royal Bank of Canada. But one of the things that I learned in the early days with that experience is I was there to help a private wealth manager build his book of business. And literally at the time, he just gave me like a phone book and said, call wealthy people from the yellow pages or from the white pages in the phone book and just
I
figure it
don't
out.
even know what that is.
So it's literally, there used to be a book that every city had that would have every single phone number indexed. And there
Wow.
was a white section, which was the personal info, and then there was the yellow section. And you had to flip like every page, but it was ordered by zip code. So I grew up in Canada, but it's postal code, but you could look
Okay.
up like because he wanted to target affluent individuals.
Yeah,
So
that makes
eventually
sense.
I had to go look at the wealthy neighborhoods, figure out that zip code, and then just start manually calling with like not a smartphone, but like an old school phone. I had to press the numbers.
Yeah.
Someone would pick up and kind of like hang up. And, what was interesting is, from that experience, you learn it's all a numbers game and you have to be able to face rejection and, know that you're adding value. But one of the things that I never liked about the cold experience is that I never wanted to feel like I was spamming people. I always wanted to feel like I was adding value. And the reality is that this wealth manager could build incredible value for his clients. And, I saw from working there that summer that there were people who increase their net worth based on investments at 30% a year, maybe 40% every year. So it was really a good service. So what I realized is that the way you drive more legitimacy when reaching out to someone is if you could refer to something of value. So what we experimented with first was actually sending a message to like a physical mailer to to their houses before I would call that would add some information about the state of the market or like something of value. So I think at the time it was like a flyer that talked about how to diversify your
Oh,
portfolio for retirement.
okay. You kind of broke up there for a second, but you're back now. All right.
Okay, cool.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Yeah, but
Oh, no worries at all. And then, but what we realize is, hey, if you could have a website that when I call, I could refer people to, and I could say, hey, check out Ami's website on RBC, it would further legitimize the business and it would create an omni-channel experience. So someone, already knows the brand of RBC. It's very prominent in Canada. They maybe didn't know this wealth manager, but by getting a link to the website and getting direct mail and then following up with a call, it shifted the game where they all of a sudden saw that I'm adding value to that experience versus, something that's, more an advertisement or spam. And that ultimately built trust and allowed me to recruit customers for them.
that's also something interesting that you talked about that that by helping people and adding value to them as well, that got them to use you. So do you think that's an important principle that by helping others, you kind of in turn help yourself, or do you think you need to solely be looking out for yourself and helping yourself, or
I'm a big believer that you want to make a good impression on everyone you meet, and if there are things you can do to uplift them, whether that's by giving wisdom or experience, whether that's introing them to someone else, that can be very transformative. And I believe the more you put out there and the more you help people, the more goodness that comes back to you. Um, so yeah, for me, I'm always looking at ways that I can delight people, help people, give people intros, be helpful, share my learnings.
yeah, that's amazing. Um, so then, back in 2009, 2010, kind of that time, you started Appdirect, and that was a little bit of a unique time because of the Great Depression and all, and but that was also when the businesses started rebounding. So, do you think so you were out of college there, you had no fallback, the economy was down. It was really do or die for you. And do you think what's it like to be in that position? Do you think that forced you almost to succeed, or what's it like then?
My view is that entrepreneurship a lot is about risk. And I've met a lot of great um, people who have worked at amazing places and they endeavor to start a business, but won't take the risk. A lot of, I used to host Harvard Business School grads and other grads in our office in San Francisco. And if there was a, group of 20 people who said, I'm going to graduate and start my own business, you'd only have like one or two out of the 20 do it because all those students were getting job offers for hundreds of thousands at, a big investment bank or private equity firm. So the risk wasn't adjusted for them to start as an entrepreneur. So when people ask me like, what's the best time to start something, I would say like there's no better time than now. What was interesting is when I was in college, I studied some of the most successful people that I knew, and the prevailing wisdom at the time was that if you wanted to be successful, you should go into consulting or investment banking. Ideally, you should work at McKinsey or Goldman Sachs, and then perform there for a while, then go get your MBA, and then go into private equity or hedge funds. And then maybe from there, someday you can raise money and then start something on your own. So to me, when I was in college, I spent all my time thinking of like, how do I get these dream jobs? And when the recession hit, those jobs were no longer available. And, I thought it was really stressful. But the silver lining is that that presented the opportunity instead of waiting a few years to start something to just start it. And I think that's where the best opportunities arouse. So I had thought in my head, okay, I can't start something until I'm, 30 or 35 or 40 and I've accomplished all these things. But I said, screw it, I'm just going to start. And it turned out to be one of the greatest kind of decisions I've ever made in my life. Now today, I think there's much more awareness around entrepreneurship, and there's so many publicly celebrated stories of entrepreneurs that have been successful. One of my investors at Appdirect, Peter Thiel, he started the Thiel Fellowship, which encouraged young students to kind of just start. And I think like I know your podcast is geared toward students who are thinking about what they want to do in their career, and I think entrepreneurship, in my view, is something that I won't say you necessarily have to be born with it, but I do think it's something that hits you and you can't shake it. So
Yeah.
you probably feel it like I want to do this thing or you don't. Um, and my view is if you feel like you have this idea or you want to explore something or you want to try something, like run with it. Don't let anyone stop you.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And it's funny because I had some, other people on the podcast, and they also say something very similar that, initially they didn't want to become an entrepreneur. They wanted that dream job, but, something kind of forced them, and that they adapted and they realized that they were an entrepreneur. Um,
Maybe
so
just
I
on
was
that
looking.
point, the one thing I'd say is that now more so than ever, some of the best entrepreneurs are in their 20s. Like I spoke to the co-founder of Bland AI, which in my view is one of the hottest, up and coming AI companies. So they help use language models to automate voice. So it's really you can speak to it and you can automate like the voice
Wow.
technology. And the co-founder Soban, I think he started it when he was 18. He's 20 now. And he's, I spoke to him. I've spoke to like tons of successful entrepreneurs. He's just as great as anyone. So I think if anyone tells you to be a great entrepreneur, you need, 10 years of experience or 20 years or 30 years. I think it's bullshit. I think that you can be great at any point. That being said, in my view, the entrepreneurs who have had the biggest impact over the longest point of time are people who can, take feedback and who are self-reflective and who are self-aware and can evolve over time. So I'm encouraging of entrepreneurs of all ages. And frankly, right now I'm starting my second company, and some of my fiercest competitors are people with far less experience, but they get that young energy of not knowing what they don't know, and that can drive a long way.
Wow, that's amazing that you're competing with a 20-year-old or even an 18-year-old and that they started these companies.
Yeah, he's
Um,
luckily not my competitor, but I'd say I am competing with a lot of people in their
yeah.
teens and 20s. And honestly, if you were to ask me who I'm more worried about, I would be more worried about the younger person beating me than the person with more experience, to be honest.
Yeah, because they're kind of stuck in their ways. Those bigger companies, they figured out what works and they stick with that. But the younger person, they're still learning. They're still trying to, move all around and figure out what works. So, do you think they're in the future they're going to be the ones leading the innovation, driving technology forward, like the younger people, or do you think it's still going to be? Do you think the entire business landscape is going to change from those older monoliths to now these kind of newer startups?
I think it's a great question. So, there's incumbent advantages of being big. So, Google or Microsoft or, even now OpenAI, right? They're probably better capitalized. They have better brand recognition. They have more teams. But there are also inherent advantages for startups. Um, Generally, if you want a startup to kind of grow to be massive, they need to do something very differently than what an incumbent would do. So if I were giving, anyone a tip on how to create $1 billion business or $100 billion business, my thinking would be don't just go and copy what exists today, but have a viewpoint of what technology has just recently emerged that will change the game for the world And how can you leverage that to bring a new experience to market that generally will not be comparable with what exists today? And in order to do that, you have to foresee the future a little bit. But in general, you can't just change like the product by being marginally 10% better. It has to be like 10x better. And you can't just innovate on product. You have to innovate on marketing and business model and investor relations and brand. So I do think if you're a startup that wants to achieve great things, the advantage that you have is starting from first principles or just thinking for yourself. And I think that young entrepreneurs who haven't been scarred by all the reasons why things don't work um, can view a world in which something that someone has been in the industry for 10, 15 years might say, this is impossible. But the younger person could not have the history to know that it's
Yeah.
impossible. Just go try it and it works.
Wow. That's amazing that just attempting the impossible, they might accomplish something. So it's interesting with the changing, also with the remote working versus in-person working, that's also a changing landscape. And do you think with everything remote now being that, this was brought up on one of my other podcasts, but that these younger people, they lack that mentor, that in-person kind of guiding shepherd. Do you think that by working remote for these younger companies, do you think that's detrimental or?
I think that you can gain mentorship in many different ways. I think that if I were coming out of school, I would want to work with people in person because it's fun. You get the sense of culture and camaraderie that you wouldn't get working remote. I think though nothing should stop you from trying to find a mentor. And it's that much better if you can meet that mentor in person, or for coffee or whatever it might be. But I wouldn't say that that should prevent you from trying. So there are many students or people that I've met that come from communities that don't have successful entrepreneurs, and that's not a reason to not reach out and try to learn from great people. So I've had many aspiring entrepreneurs over the years cold email me saying, didn't go to college, didn't do this, didn't have exposure, but I want to learn. And I think that I would encourage anyone to be able to try to seek mentorship from anyone. And I truly believe that people want to help people. And, if you're in a situation where you can't get that in-person experience, then there's ways to replicate it online. But I would say if you have the option, it's a lot more fun to be in person, especially when you're starting your career.
Certainly, everything has its trade-offs. Um, so then, I started looking into your company's history. I started looking at the press releases and all, and it seemed like during the 2010s, it was like every other month, Appdirect acquires, Appdirect expands or builds or new partnership. So what was it like to go from zero, nothing really, to now $1 billion company leading the industry? What was it like, just to do that in a matter of years?
So I think when you look at things in the movies or in the news, it all looks easy. It's kind of like you started this thing and all
Yeah, it looked
it's a
like it was
million
just a
users, or
straight
you,
line
yeah,
path.
it's a straight line up. I would say if you like, let's say I'm picking a number, but let's say it took me 2,500 days to, see a certain level of success. I would say only 30 of those days probably felt good. Um, and it's not to say it to not be encouraging, but it's that entrepreneurship is mainly about facing rejection so many times, but persisting to see the opportunity and earn your success. And most of the entrepreneurs that I've met that would consider themselves a failure, in my view, they just failed less than I did. Um, I, I failed more times and was able to kind of persist through the shit and the challenges. Um, so you do have to be a little bit of crazy to be an entrepreneur because you have to um, put aside the small failures and really just look toward every failure is going to be bringing you closer to success. That's why I do think like cold outreach or cold calling or starting in sales and business development is a great trait because it teaches you, yeah, you're gonna fail most of the time, but when you do hit it, you can create value.
Now, what about you? You've mentioned all these very difficult times, constant rejection, 30 days out of 2,500 actually being good. What got you through all that? Was it something inside of yourself, a passion, or was it something that you were chasing, like an object, a goal, or what motivated you?
I think ultimately you need strong conviction in your vision. That's kind of the number one piece of advice I give entrepreneurs is to have that strong conviction in your vision. In order to do that, you need to have a vision. So there's a lot of people who may not be able to foresee their vision for what they want to change in the world. But if you're one of those people who have the gift to or the opportunity to kind of seek toward that change, then just stay convicted and kind of maniacal about that, and don't let anyone bring you down. I also think that culture and team can really help. So my co-founder at Appdirect and I, were best friends and kind of brought each other up when we were down and celebrated the little wins. So I think that um, if you can almost celebrate failure and see that as like, every time that someone rejects you brings you closer to the yes. It's kind of a weird psychology, but that's when you can see success. But honestly, like I don't know if I've ever seen a fly by night success. And even now, we're 2024 and there are some frothy companies where like companies went from zero to $1 billion in valuation in less than a year. What I can anticipate in those situations is um, nothing's easy forever. So if you get credit for your success ahead of the curve, you have a few hard years coming because you have to meet the expectations of your investors and your team, but also, your own ego. So one of the things that, you know, people mention is that like, okay, and there was a date when we got the unicorn valuation, and all of a sudden you get a lot more press and you get a lot more expectations, and people think you're smarter than you are. But it's hard because in order to meet those expectations, you have to continue to climb, and that's never the way things go. They're never always up and to the right. There's like crazy ups and downs. So I'd say in some ways you're disadvantaged if you're recognized early, and your valuation or your recognition is so far ahead of the curve. So I think that for many entrepreneurs that are on the grind for the first year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and don't see success, it sometimes may be easier than someone who has it really easy right away and then thinks that it's always going to be easy, but then comes crashing. So um, I think it's so easy to look at the Mark Zuckerbergs or Evan Spiegels of the world and just say like, oh, people hit it in their 20s and it's easy and they got millions of users. But go look at the Forbes billionaires or whatever list you want to go look at. Most people hit it when they're way later in life, and it's because of story of hardship and rejection that got them closer.
Yeah, that's very interesting what you had to say because I do look at some of the people on Forbes, and when they were like 2025 they were doing very well, and then you see what they're doing now, and not always has it worked out for them. It's kind of sad that they're 30 and it hasn't really worked out for them. Um, so anyway, so then now you're starting your new company, Landbase. You've turned into a serial entrepreneur from not wanting to start as now serial entrepreneur. So how have things changed with starting a company? We've talked a little bit about from zero to $1 billion in a year, and it's been 10 years since you started it. How are you taking everything you've learned and applying that to your new company? How have things changed for you?
I think that the best entrepreneurs, have day one thinking. So Jeff Bezos wrote this, article years ago, which was the idea that like every day you should think of it as day one. And that's very hard if you're running a company for 20 years. But starting again from scratch gives you the opportunity to kind of rethink what day one looks like. And I would say that most of the skill sets or lessons that I used starting a company 15 years ago don't apply today. And if I use the same playbook or if I ruminated on all the mistakes I made back then and tried to learn from them now, it would make me a worse entrepreneur. So that's where I truly feel I'm on the same playing field as anyone else who started a company in 2024, whether you're, 50, 30, 40, or 20. Um, the game has changed. The tools are different. The technology is different. The speed is different. So the thing that you can rest back on is I still have this thing where I have this vision for the way the world doesn't exist, and I want to make sure I can bring that to life. And then I really have like this conviction in the vision that I'm going to figure it out. So it's interesting because I think I'm not that much more advantaged starting a business the second time. Maybe I have, investors who know me and trust me a little bit more, but even that, investors have a high bar. And if you're a second time entrepreneur and you've made money, they want to make sure that you're still going to work hard and you have the rigor and you have the drive. So I think that it just goes back to having strong conviction in an idea and doing whatever you can to figure out the way to bring that to the world.
That's kind of interesting that you mentioned that although that the investors believe you, they still want to know if you have what it takes, if you still have that drive. I just had never thought about that. So with you, it sounds like your vision is like you really want to help people, and do you think that's kind of your general vision? You know, how do you create something in the world that's not there? And do you think that that mindset has allowed you, because that's ever evolving, that's an ever evolving goal? Do you think that mindset has allowed you to stay relevant all these years?
I think relevance is a really difficult thing. I think if you're motivated by the mission you're driving toward, then I think you can come to work every day and enjoy it. And that shouldn't be an external metric as much as an internal metric. So I think that the happiest people that I've seen in life are ones who do what they love and who don't get too caught up in the external pressure. Um, so yeah, I think that's one thing that just doesn't change. So to me, the thing I would recommend to any entrepreneur is truly do what you love because you have to throw yourself at it. And it's funny because after, I started a company in the B2B tech world because I love entrepreneurs and I want to help entrepreneurs. And I always thought, hey, maybe if I start something different, I would do something totally different, like maybe in music or entertainment or, politics, whatever it might be. But I realized like my passion and my purpose is really to help entrepreneurs. So went back and kind of am doing it again. That's what drives me.
Wow. Um, so now with your new company, Landbase, you just raised, well, a little bit ago, you raised 12.5 million, and and now you're starting that as well, generative AI, where AI does actions on your behalf. So what's it like? And you claim this is going to be 5 times bigger than software as a service. So what's it like to be at the lead of that, to be at the forefront of this new technology, this new industry?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So yeah, so agentic AI, in my view, which is AI that takes action based on data, will be far bigger of an impact than SaaS itself. And it's interesting because last year when we started the company, you could barely Google the word. Like there's two kind of underlying components to the technology. One is um, large action models or action models that take action based on data, and the other is like agentic AI, which threads through multiple agents or kind of let's say technologies that can reason or make a decision. So the maturity of that technology beyond like a very small research community was non-existent Jan 1 of 2024. And what's wild is now everyone's talking about it. So the thing that's hardest for me this time than before is that I can come up with an idea that I think is ahead of the curve, but another 10,000 people are going to realize it, 3 to 6 months down the line. So you have to be that much faster at executing based on a vision, because the market is moving that much, faster. So I have this like strong conviction that we're at the beginning of the agentic AI wave, and that was made possible by large language models and a lot of the investments from infrastructure companies. So I'm very hopeful that over the next few years, there's going to be a ton of B2B technologies and companies that are going to be very transformative. However, I think that there'll be so many competing people working around the same problems that you can't lose that hustle or that drive. So for me, I'm more, incented and more pumped than ever that I have to move faster than ever before in order to succeed, because the market is moving so fast.
Wow, that the market is just so incredibly fast that amazes me as well. That it's just so hard to keep up, and that there's so many people doing it. That even though it's so much bigger, the world out there and the businesses, that you have to continually find your own niche and to pursue that when nobody else is pursuing. Um, so you have your own podcast, right? It's called Digital Decoding, and on there you kind of do what I do. You try and figure out who people are and why they are the way they are. And you said you were doing that because you wanted to see what makes people succeed, right? So what have you found that if you could share with us a little bit?
I think that there's many different paths to success. But deep down inside, it's a person that had a vision and really is convicted on executing that. So I would say that, while you could play different statistics and things, I'd say that when I meet someone who's successful, they generally are no different than you or I. They just put a lot of effort and attention to solving the main problem that they wanted to put in the world. Um, and one thing when I was in high school or college, I always thought that there were these people that you put up on a pedestal. So I remember thinking, like, I grew up in Canada and I've had I've been grateful to meet many prime ministers. And I used to think that they're like superhuman people, but when you meet them, you're like, okay, well, you have to go to the bathroom too, and you have things to stress about, and you're not always perfect. And I think the kind of the cool thing about growing up in your era is that no one can hide anymore. So, 15, 20 years ago, before like phones and clubs and social media, like, everyone or a lot of people who were successful could manicure this image that they never did any wrong. And the reality is everyone does shit that's bad and wrong. And if you had a camera in front of your face 24/7, you'd look stupid too. So I think that there's something very humanizing about the world today, and that a young person can kind of look and find a leader and say, hey, here are the things that I admire about them, and here's their success, but also here are the stupid things they said, or here are the hardships they went through. So I think in one ways, a lot of people in my generation or my parents' generation would think so negatively about the fact that, hey, there's no good leaders, or, all these people have problems. But I actually think there's a silver lining, which is young people can realize that no one's perfect, and hopefully you could forgive, and hopefully you realize that, hey, you know I know in your head, like when I'm in college, okay, like I'm going out and I'm doing something stupid, I'm getting drunk and being hungover for a test, or I'm like gonna be late to a meeting, and I'm gonna not dress the right way, or I'll go to a dinner and maybe I use the wrong etiquette. And like I used to stew over all that shit, thinking like, wow, like I'm such an idiot that I did this, or why am I, how could I have, got, failed the test or not been ready or whatever. But all this shit is human. So I think that the one thing that's kind of cool about this era is you can probably already sense that no one's perfect, and
Yeah.
just focus on the things that you can. And um, it's hard to fail publicly, but the more you fail, the closer you'll be to success.
That's really cool, and it's kind of like that quote by what was his name? Like not Thomas Edison, whoever invented the light bulb. I forget, but he goes like, I didn't invent the light bulb. I just completed the 10,000 steps necessary to figuring it out. And and so I guess in a way, do you think success is inevitable? I know it's a little bit of a strange question, but do you think if you keep trying, you'll eventually get somewhere?
I absolutely think so. Um, I think do things in baby steps, because if you set an unrealistic expectation of yourself, it can be hard to, um, in your own mind, feel like you're achieving. So I'd say that if you break things into small pieces and then, bite off bigger and bigger chunks, that's how you can sustainably. We said this earlier, but I think people who have success very early on in life, whether it's in entertainment or sport or business, um, the hardest thing they'll have to do is kind of deal with their ego of always being able to climb from there. So I would say a lot of the successful people I've met that are happy as well are ones that didn't have the overnight success. Because I think there's something about overnight success that can put 20 or
It's
30%.
not fulfilling.
I don't know if it's fulfilling, it's just it can make you go crazy, right? Like, um, uh,
Yeah, like
fortunately, the pressure can be too high. So it's easier for your psychology to, you know, grow, let's say, linearly than exponentially, and then have a decline.
so. It seems you're also interested in thinking about people, and we've done a lot of this talking about how people are. What's your take on nature versus nurture? And I kind of already have a think of where you're going in that debate, but which side do you think that it is?
Yeah, I think we brought it up earlier. I think that you can't train someone to be an entrepreneur. You can definitely train someone to be a good executive. So I think that I've seen entrepreneurs start when they're really young. I've seen entrepreneurs start in the middle of their career or at the end of their career. And again, like to me, if I'm judging an entrepreneur, you can tell from their passion for their idea. So in my mind, entrepreneurship, I wouldn't say you have to be born with it, but I would say it's like a virus that finds you and you can't get rid of it. Um, and however, when it comes to taking an idea and then scaling to the big game, that is extreme like training or nurture. So you as an individual have to be self-reflective to learn how to develop and to take feedback from a lot of places. Um, and you have to be able to figure out how you can self-learn and what areas of feedback you accept and what you don't. Um, so, whether it's like Brian Chesky from Airbnb recently saying like that whole kind of concept around self-reflection and learning is what's made him successful. Or whether it's, I think anything, I think you need two things. One is you need to have this like be crazy enough to take the risk to start something that's going to be crazy and big. And that I think you can't train for. It's just going to hit you. And then from there, yeah, you need to have a lot of ability to be self-reflective to expand and evolve. And one of the hardest parts, and I think, is that you'll get feedback from a lot of people, and everyone means well, or a lot of people mean well with giving you feedback. But if you took everyone's feedback, you'd just be average. So I think you have to, as an entrepreneur, be very intentional about what feedback you're going to accept and what feedback you're not. And that's one of the biggest things I've seen, because if you take everyone's feedback, you're going to just be average. So you have to be good at taking feedback from different places and being respectful about that feedback, but then figuring out of this feedback, what am I going to take or not? Because honestly, most of the time, if I were to ask like 100 people an opinion, you're going to have 50 that are one way and 50 that are the other. And if you go in between, you're going to create a really average outcome. So the key is knowing like how, if you want an outlier outcome, you need to take outlier feedback, but who do you take it from? That's the hard part.
Yeah. So we're getting towards the end here. I've taken us a little bit beyond our half hour time frame that I kind of set. But one last question. Um, I know it's hard to answer, but where do you see yourself in 1 year, maybe 5 years or 10 years? What's your future look like?
Yeah, no, I think at this point I have like a very high drive to create amazing value with Landbase, and I think it can be transformative to the way businesses generate leads. So with Landbase, we're helping businesses with the biggest pain point they have, which is generating leads that convert. We talked about this, but we're using agentic AI to execute demand gen. And it kind of leverages a lot of the learnings I had from my early days of cold calling that we discussed, or reaching out to Bill Gates and others. And my goal within the year is to have built something that is 10 or 100x better than what exists, and to have customers that love it. And then, you can scale that. Um, and my goal in 10 years is hopefully to have continued to create transformative businesses that impact the ability for entrepreneurs to start and grow. So really excited about the mission of helping entrepreneurs.
All right. Well, I really thank you for joining me tonight. This was a really interesting episode here, and thank you, Daniel.
Awesome, Danny. Well, thank you. And I know you'll be super successful, and keep the hustle, and
Yeah.
yeah, excited for you.
All right. I'll see you later. Stop recording.